Good evening. My name is Beth Commerce, and I'm delighted to welcome you tonight to this community conversation on the Page Amendment. Before we get started with our main speakers, there are a few issues we need to address. Tonight, we are offering simultaneous interpretation of the presentation and discussion in 4 languages. If you would like to hear tonight's discussion in Somali, Spanish, Hmong, or Karen, please first select the interpretation button in the lower section of your Zoom window, and then select the language you would like to hear. If you are listening in English, you do not need to use the interpretation button. Because we are providing interpretation into several languages simultaneously, portions of tonight's presentation may seem a little slowed down than you're used to. Thank you for understanding. Please turn your microphones off using the mute button in Zoom to limit the background noise. Thank you. If you wish, feel free to turn on your camera. Neel and Justice Page always like to connect with audience members. We will take questions from the Zoom chat, and a moderator will speak those questions during the Q&A portion. Please enter your questions throughout the presentation for inclusion in the final discussion. If you are unable to use the Zoom chat to ask your questions in English, you can send your questions to me after the session, and we'll get them translated and we'll get an answer back to you in the coming days. I will give you my email in a little bit. Thank you so much. And with that, I will turn it over to Kulia.
Hi, thank you. Welcome everybody to Children's First, the community conversation about all our children. My name is Kulia Pringle, and I am the Coordinator of Family Engagement and Advocacy with the Minnesota Parent Union. And I will be facilitating the Q&A later on. I am joined by President of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve's Neel Kashkari, former Supreme Court Justice and Vikings Hall of Famer Alan Page, Nevada Little Wolf, the Executive Director of Our Children, the campaign that is pushing forward the Page Amendment. And I'm going to hand it over to Justice Page and Neel to kick us off.
Thank you, Kulia, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Neel Kashkari, President of the Minneapolis Fed. I will start, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Alan Page, to offer his thoughts. And then we look forward to having the discussion with you. Before we begin, I want to thank a few of you. I thank all of you, but I want to call out a few of you. Fridley's school board member, Abdi Salam Adam. Abdi Salam, thank you for being here. It's good to see you again. St. Paul Public School Board Chair Jeannie Foster, thank you for being here. Former Mankato School Board member, Abdi Sabri, thank you for being here. And Minneapolis ELL lead teacher, Mariam Adam, thank you also. Good to see you again. I moved to Minnesota 5 years ago. And one of my big surprises when I moved here was to discover the terrible education achievement gaps that we have in Minnesota. I knew on average, Minnesota has a highly educated workforce, and on average, it has very good schools. So I assumed that everyone in Minnesota would be doing better. But when I got here, I discovered that's not true. That there are terrible achievement gaps in education where children of color are badly trailing many of their white peers, and low-income children of all races, including low-income white children, are badly trailing their middle-class and more well-to-do peers. And I asked my researchers at the Minneapolis Fed to help me understand why. Why do these gaps exist? What has been done to close these gaps? And what can we learn from around the country from other states? I'm just giving the translators a second. What we realized is that there have been many attempts in Minnesota to close these gaps over the last 20 or 30 years. Many people have tried very hard. And if we're being honest with each other, we have to concede that we've made zero progress, zero, despite good faith effort. And if you look around the country, some other states have made real progress. This is not an impossible problem to solve. Some people you meet with, they'll say, no, you have to first solve poverty, or there are problems in families, other issues. Well, these other states have those same challenges too, and yet they've made real progress in closing these gaps. And I'll give you an example. In the late 1990s, Minnesota and Florida were roughly equal in how well their low-income children were doing. In 20 years, we were both ranked around 35th out of 50 states. In 20 years, Minnesota is right where we were. We have not moved at all. Florida is now 6th in the nation. They've made dramatic progress in only 20 years. So these problems are possible if you have the political will to make major changes. And what we realized is that in Minnesota, we are politically divided. Both parties don't agree on what the solutions are. And so while they make changes, the only changes they make are little tiny changes around the margin. There has not been consensus to fundamentally change the system. And that's why we've made no progress. So a little more than 2 years ago, I reached out to Justice Page, both because he spent 22 years on Minnesota's Supreme Court and because he has a lifetime of work in education equity. And I asked him, is there a way we could use the law to break through these barriers, to lead to real reform, and to really put children first? So we began to work together. And we started by looking at the Minnesota Constitution. All 50 states' constitution has an education provision. And Minnesota's education provision was written in 1857. 1857, slavery was still legal in much of America. And the Minnesota Constitution essentially says that children have the right to access an adequate education system. What does that mean? What is an adequate education system? It is a system that is on average adequate. For some, it's terrific. For others, it's lousy. And if your child gets access to that system, whether they're at the top or the bottom, it doesn't matter. Their rights have been met. So when we realize that, it seems to us that the Minnesota education system today is working precisely as the Constitution requires. Great for some, lousy for others, on average adequate. And then we looked around the country, and several states have updated their constitutions to say adequate is not good enough. Let's make quality our objective. And so that's ultimately how we came to this proposal that every child in Minnesota would have a civil right to a quality public education, and then make this the highest priority of the state. That is how we think we can lead to transformational change so that all of our children get the education that they deserve. Let me pause there, and I'll turn it over to Alan to offer his thoughts.
Thank you, Neel. I come to this question of education after more years than I want to recall, visiting schools and classrooms across Minnesota and indeed across the country, talking to young children about education and using education as a tool to achieve their hopes and dreams. And you know, the most significant thing I noticed was that whether they're kindergartners or first graders or second graders, third, fourth, fifth graders. They're all curious. They all want to learn, but that somewhere along the way, we've failed them. So when Neel asked if I would sit down and talk with him about what we might do using the law to change education in Minnesota, I was excited about the opportunity. And when we sat down, we looked at Minnesota's Constitution. As Neel pointed out, it focuses on, or it gives children a right to an adequate education. And it focuses on the system. Indeed, when it talks about adequate education, it talks about an adequate system. It also focuses on funding that system. The language has no focus on children. So we thought that if we could shift the focus to include children, we could create a catalyst for change. And so let me just walk you through our proposed language. All children have a fundamental right. That is to say, all children. And when I say all children, it means all children. Black children, Indigenous children, Hmong children, Latinx children, poor children, wealthy children, middle-class children, urban, suburban, rural children, able-bodied and disabled children. All children have a right to a quality public education that fully prepares them with the skills necessary for participation in our economy, our democracy, and society. And people often ask, what does quality mean when we're talking about public education? Well, the language tells us. A quality public education is an education that fully prepares children with the skills necessary for participation in our economy, our democracy, and our society. We go on to say, as measured against uniform achievement standards set forth by the state. What does that mean? People say, does that mean that we're really going to institutionalize the testing regimen that we have today in our schools? A regimen that takes a snapshot of where children are in a given day, but which doesn't tell us anything about how they got to where they are or what we can do to help them advance. It doesn't mean that. What it means is that when the constitutional amendment goes into effect, the legislature, the governor, families, children, educators will sit down and develop a measurement tool to determine whether a quality public education is being provided, and how well children are doing, so that it can be used to help them advance, unlike the system we have today. The last sentence is important, and that reads, "It is a paramount duty of the state to ensure quality public schools that fulfill this fundamental right." By paramount duty, we mean that the state would have no higher duty than to ensure quality public schools. No higher duty. In all the things that the state does, there may be things that rise to the level of a paramount duty as it relates to education, but nothing would be more important. The other thing that's important about this sentence is that it places the duty on the state. We're talking about each branch of government of the state would have some responsibility. The executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. A right without a remedy isn't much of a right. And so we think that this language can be a catalyst for real change. The current language, as Neel suggested, is doing exactly what it was intended to do. We think that it is time, if we're really serious about ensuring educational opportunity for all children, it is time for a constitutional change. Neel, did I?
That was great. I would just add, we added up in Minnesota in the last 15 years, there have been 122 individual pieces of education legislation that have become law. 122 bills in 15 years. And they haven't moved the needle because they're all nibbling around the edges. Unless we are willing to make systematic change, we're going to keep doing the same thing and having the same outcome. And if you look at the history of the United States, the biggest changes in our society have come through civil rights. Whether it's the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery, the 15th Amendment giving men of color the right to vote, the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote, Brown versus Board of Education. These are landmark changes in our society. That's what we believe is needed now. And so exactly what Alan said, the question for us as a state, are we serious about closing these gaps and closing these disparities? We talk about it a lot. Are we in fact serious? I hope the answer is yes. We'd be pleased to take your questions.
Thank you, Neel. I will read the first question. What will the Page Amendment do to address teacher training programs, Pellsby and Pearson, the main challenges?
Well, the language is not prescriptive. It doesn't say specifically how we will go forward. Indeed, once the amendment is passed, that's when the real work will come, because we will have to look at teacher preparation. We will have to, for the first time, because this is an individual right, we will have to begin educating children where they are, not where we would like them to be. There are those who say, you know, we've got to fix poverty. We've got to fix families, as Neel suggested. What those people are really saying is these children can't be educated. And that's just wrong. If we meet children where they are, with teachers who are prepared to work with them where they are and help them advance, which is what this proposed amendment would require, change will happen.
Do you have anything, Neel?
No, I think Alan covered it. Thank you.
In practice, what would change under the rubric of a quality education?
Well, I'll take the lead on this. It's exactly what Alan said, which is the language is not prescriptive. We're not here to say, this is what the class size should be. This is what the curriculum should be. We think that teachers and parents should decide what their children need in order to be successful. And it will likely vary. Different children will need different things in order to be successful. It might vary around the state. It might vary classroom to classroom or student to student. So everything is on the table. Might it lead to smaller classes? Yes. Might it lead to different training for teachers? Yes. Might it lead to different curriculums for different children? Yes. The bottom line is each child, what does this amendment do? Each child should receive the education to help that child reach his or her full potential. If it supports that, including early childhood education, it can be included under this because that's so important.
Is undocumented children included in all children?
All children means all children.
What specific outcomes do you want to occur as a result of the amendment? Some changes Florida has made have been school choice, including private schools. Some Minnesota commentators interpret that as the outcome of this amendment. Is that the specific goal?
That is not only not the specific goal, it is inconsistent with the amendment's language. It is a paramount duty of the state to ensure quality public schools. The state would have no higher duty. Now, it is suggested that that's really what's behind this. But the reality is that if the Minnesota legislature passed a bill that took the state down the privatization road and had a governor that would sign it, it would become law, and that's where we would be. They can do that today. And it's true that our proposed amendment doesn't prevent them from doing that, with one, I think, very, very important caveat. And that is that because public education and quality public schools would be a paramount duty of the state, the legislature and the governor couldn't take us down the privatization road at the expense of public education. And it strikes me that because they can't do it at the expense of, it strikes me that that's a tremendous disincentive, a disincentive that they don't have today.
And I would just add, not only has Justice Page been clear with the language that this is not leading to privatization, Attorney General Ellison has also said, there's no way this leads to privatization of our public education system. So two of the top legal minds in the state have drawn that conclusion, and I think it's very persuasive. But
I would
well, go ahead, Alan.
Well, I would just say, if you read the words of the proposed amendment and give them their plain and ordinary meanings, it is clear that this is not about privatization of public education.
So what would happen? I mean, a broader question is, what do we think would happen once this passes? We think this will be the catalyst for the legislature and the governor to come together and lead a process with the teachers and the parents to say, what do we want our education system of the future to look like? Now is our chance to design that for the future. And then all of the above is available, whether it's class sizes, training, curriculum, all of that is available in whatever we, the people, choose to do.
I agree with the premise that all children should have a quality education that is personalized to their needs. How do we utilize the systems or solutions that are working and expand them to other districts versus requiring every system to be the same?
Well, the beauty of this language is that it doesn't require every district to be the same. What it requires is that each school, each classroom, each child get the education that they need. And mind you, this is child focused. It's not system focused.
If this were to pass, what do you believe the next step would be? Are there any specific starting points or place of focus?
Well, I think the starting point would be that process with the legislature and the governor and the people to come together and design the system of the future. But as the prior question indicated, there are examples of people making progress. And so I don't think we'd be starting from scratch. I think it would be bringing those models forward and saying, here's where schools are having success. How do we share that? And how do we roll that out more broadly where it makes sense?
Do you feel, do you feel that the current way we educate our children fully prepares them for the needs of the 21st century?
Some children. I mean, some children in Minnesota are getting a great education, but it's not enough.
But far too many aren't.
I heard the amendment has been introduced at the legislature. Is that the main method to getting it passed, or will it be before the voters at some point?
Well, the first step in getting it passed is for the legislature, 50 plus 1% of each house of the legislature, passing it to have it put on the ballot. Once the legislature does that, then it goes on the ballot and the people of Minnesota get to decide whether we're serious about educating all children.
You know, we've seen, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Thank you. We've seen polling, and I'll just say, you mentioned Nevada is here from Our Children. They're running the campaign. They've done polling. The people of Minnesota care about education. And the polling that they've done has said that we think that 80% of Minnesotans would support this amendment if given the chance. So the challenge before us is to get the legislature to support it. And the resistance that we're getting, I mean, we've got bipartisan support, which is great. Democrats of color from the Twin Cities have partnered with conservative Republicans from greater Minnesota. The biggest businesses in Minnesota are supporting it. Attorney General Ellison is supporting us. It's a very broad coalition, which is exciting. But the biggest resistance is really about power. What does this amendment really do? It gives power to families that don't have power today. Poor families, families of color. And there are people who are nervous about having to give up power or share power with those who don't have power today.
I think you sort of answered these questions, so I think it's just about like reiterating what you've already stated. The last couple of questions is, are the legislators, or who are the legislators that are supporting it? What do the teachers think about what's leading to disparate impacts? Why does the teachers union continue to tell lies about vouchers and privatization? Are you supported by the teachers union and MDE?
We are not supported by Education Minnesota. Indeed, they have been very vocal in their opposition. I have to tell you, I don't understand that. We are open to meeting with them, talking with them. And I should say, we are also open to making this language stronger. We're not at all interested or open to making it weaker. The time for real change has come. There is an urgency of now. We can't be here 20 years from now having this same conversation. If we don't change the constitutional language, sort of the framework of our education system, we will be here 20 years from now having the same conversation.
I think another question was still on like, how is this going to help with teachers of color? So I think you said before, it's not specific.
It's not specific, but I think the research shows that children who have teachers who look like them perform better. Teachers who have some shared experience and understand who they're teaching, children perform better. That's all part of educating the individual child. And it's all a part of quality. So while it's not prescriptive, it certainly follows that there will need to be more teachers of color. And can I just say on this subject of having teachers who look like the students in the classroom, we have to talk with our children because about becoming teachers. Because if we're going to have more teachers of color, they're going to come from our classrooms. They're not going to miraculously come from someplace else. It's the kids we're teaching who are going to be future teachers. And we need to talk to them about becoming teachers.
I can see, it's a statement and a question. I can see how the parent-led curriculum can be very helpful, especially for underserved people whose histories have been missing. But do you worry that it could backfire in some white communities, which may prefer a racist, whitewashed, inaccurate history?
I would say we agree there are no guarantees. But the worst thing that can happen in this amendment, and I think in both of our opinions, is that nothing changes. is that, imagine that the amendment passes and then the legislature and the governor just ignore it and say, well, we don't want to make any changes. Even then, families would be able to go to court and say, my child's civil rights are being violated by this deeply unfair education system. And that could be a catalyst for change. I think that's the downside scenario is not enough changes. I think much more likely we're going to lead to transformational change. And could there be, imperfections around the state? Sure. But there are those happening today. I can't promise you that it'll solve all of those problems, but it gives us our best shot of transforming the system.
And I would just hearken back to the constitutional language that fully prepares children for participation in our economy, our democracy, and our society. That seems to me sure, I'm a realist. I understand that there may be people who don't want all of us to participate in our society. But the quality standards includes preparing all children for that participation.
If it is passed, will there be a board that will oversee implementation of the bill and measurements made and not made?
I think that will be up to the legislature and the governor. They are still going to have a vital role in taking this constitutional language and crafting legislation to put it into practice. So, our systems of government are still going to have to play a role, including school districts and school boards.
Will your bill support the reestablishment of a Minnesota Education Board that reports to the governor like we had decades ago?
I think it could be, it'll depend. So what ends up happening? You change the Constitution, and then legislation needs to follow to work out the details, to put it into real practice. And so that certainly could be part of that. It'll be up to the people and their elected representatives to decide what that structure looks like.
And let's be clear here. The only bill that the legislature will be, with respect to this proposed amendment, the only bill that will come about is one that puts it on the ballot. Once it's on the ballot and passed by the people, then that constitutional language becomes our North Star, if you will. Will set out our guiding principles. And legislation about practices and procedures and funding and all of that will follow. And as we've said, we can't tell you today what that'll look like. But that North Star will not only guide us, but require us to educate every child. And can I just say one other thing? The current language is from 1857. If for no other reason, putting aside the disparities in performance for Black children, Indigenous children, other children of color, putting aside those disparities, that constitutional language is grounded in a world that doesn't exist today. So that if for no other reason, we need to change our constitution so that we're being guided into the future, not controlled by the past.
Again, a lot of the questions are pointing to like specific things like what, how can this help with teachers, diversify the teaching pool? What will change, or what will happen exactly if this bill was passed?
I think all we can say is this will be the catalyst that will result in specific changes. I think it would be very difficult for this language to become a part of our Constitution for us to maintain the status quo. If we are opposed to this language and nobody comes up with something that is better, then what we're advocating for is the status quo. Nevada, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm sorry. That was my apologies to you, Justice Page. I just wanted to be able to introduce myself to this group because I know we're getting closer to the 7 o'clock hour. My name is Nevada Littlewolf, and I am the Executive Director of Our Children Minnesota and the campaign manager for the Page Amendment. I want to answer some of the questions related to the legislative process and give a little bit more detail around where we're at currently. As Justice Page and President Kashkari have stated, we have a process that we will be following to see this through. First we have to pass it in the House, and this week we dropped the bill, and we have our chief author in the House side as Representative Hassan. We have 12 other signers, and I'm just going to go through their names quickly in case anybody on the call lives in any of these districts. It would be great if you could call them, thank them, encourage them. We really appreciate this bipartisan support. So Representative Hassan, Representative Krisha, Representative Mariani, Representative Erickson, Representative Vang, Representative Kosnick, Representative Zhejiang, Representative Teese, Representative Thompson, Representative Haley, Representative Tujong, and Representative Schumacher. We're very excited and proud to have this bipartisan support to drop the bill in the House this week. And the first committee that this will go to is the Education Policy Committee. The chair of the Education Policy Committee is Representative Ruth Richardson. Another action item is anybody can do this. You don't have to live in her district. To give Representative Richardson a call and thank her for hearing the Page Amendment bill in her committee. And so that is our first step. Next week, we anticipate that we will have the bill dropped in the Senate, and we will be updating next week around our chief author there, as well as our signatories. I will put in the chat, pageamendment.com is our website, which really, as President Kashkari has indicated, we are the campaign to get the Page Amendment passed. And so while we have the Fed and President Kashkari really leading the charge around data, research, really like being the leader, putting a megaphone on this. We are the campaign side where we're really working with our lobby team, our comms team, grassroots organizers. We have big thanks to Kulia and Rashad from the Minnesota Parent Union in the work that they're doing with parents and organizing parents. And we're also organizing coalitions around the state of Minnesota, whether that's individuals, organizations, or businesses. So we do have a really broad spectrum of support. We have bipartisan support, and we continue to bring on new supporters every day. I will also put in the chat our page pledge. So if anybody on the call wants to sign on to that, that will have you listed with us as a public supporter for the page amendment. And again, like, we really want you to get signed up for our email list, because we are sending out important updates every week. I'm sending out, they go out every Thursday morning. So we have one tomorrow going out around the progress we're making, the news we're making, the events that are coming up, and our partners. We're really highlighting our partners as well. So kind of moving on with the process, once we get through the House and the Senate, it is my understanding that at that point, as Justice Page has indicated, we need 50% plus one in the House, 50% plus one in the Senate. And at that point, it goes on to the ballot. Now, my understanding is that the governor does not have veto power over a ballot initiative. So the governor can't come in and say, we're not going to put this on the Constitution, or this constitutional amendment on the ballot, and I'm going to veto it. That's not something that he can do. So it would then go straight to the ballot and to the people. From a campaign perspective, we are will continue to do public education around the Page Amendment, and, you know, work until November of 2022, at which time the people will go to the polls and they will vote in favor of the Page Amendment, and it will pass, and we will all celebrate at that point. You know, and then that's really when the legislature gets to work on meeting this new standard in the Minnesota Constitution. So that is the process we have laid out. And, you know, I know there have been some questions about Education Minnesota, and we continue to keep the door open. And we believe that they should be working in partnership with us, that we support workers, we support workers' rights, right? We support labor rights. And what we don't understand is why they are not supporting children and children's rights. And so we have continued to keep the door open. We want to understand this, and we want to work in partnership with them. From my perspective, I don't see this as anything but positive for teachers across the state of Minnesota. And we just continue to work to figure out how and why they have not been working in partnership with us. But I think it's really important for the public to know that we have continued to really try to engage with them. I would just also say that we have incredible partners with the Minnesota Business Partnership. We have 10 tribes in Minnesota that are supporting this. We have students, teachers, parents, organizations across the state, and not just education organizations, but others are paying attention to this as well. Foundations are paying attention to this. And again, that group just keeps growing. So I want to say thank you for being here with us tonight. And I'm also here to answer questions before we close out.
Thank you, Nevada. Neel and Justice, did you guys want to go ahead and say some parting words for us?
You know, I would just, we touched on this already. You know, after George Floyd was killed and COVID, all these disparities that have existed in our society for a long time have all just been made even bigger. And so for me, I feel like we are at a gut check moment. We have to ask ourselves as a state, are we serious about closing these disparities in our society? We know that there are housing disparities, healthcare disparities, job disparities, criminal justice disparities, but almost all of them, their root is in education. Because people who get more and better education have more job opportunities, they earn more, they have better access to healthcare, better access to housing, less likely to enter the criminal justice system. So that's how big a deal this is. And we asked each other, said this earlier, are we as a state serious? I hope the answer is yes. And we need your help. The only way the legislature is going to move on this is if the people demand it. Alan?
I couldn't have said it better. I would echo what you said. I would also, you talked about economic opportunity. You talked about our criminal justice system, healthcare, housing. All of these things are tied to education. And I can't remember whether I said this before, but what we're really talking about is justice. Educational justice leads to more criminal justice, health justice, housing justice, economic justice, social justice. And really presents us with the question, are we serious about educating all children? If we're not, then we have the perfect system for that. If we are, we offer the catalyst for change. Thank you. Thank you for having us this evening.
Thank you, Justice Page. Thank you, Neel. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. As Nevada says, we will have plenty of opportunity, be doing more presentation to educate everybody around the Page Amendment. I'm going to have Nevada end with like last minute, what do I need to do? You need to call your legislator. You need to, let them know that you support the Page Amendment. Also, if you want to be a part of the grassroots efforts of organizing and help spreading the word, you can text MMPU to 33339, and that will put you in contact with me. You can also contact me, Kulia Pringle. I'm on Facebook, I'm everywhere. If you want to join grassroots efforts to really get the word out and spread the word out. But thank you again, and Nevada again will close with, once again, what you can do to get in contact with her and be a part of the campaign.
Miigwech, thank you, Kulia. I want to just actually give a shout out to our interpreters tonight that were with us on the call to make sure that we have accessibility for folks in all communities. I mean, we're working really hard to make sure that we're reaching folks. So thank you for doing the work tonight for interpretation for this event. Yeah, I will say, like, the list of legislators I've listed earlier, please, please, please reach out to them. Another really great way, if you're a member of the Minnesota Parent Union, is to stay engaged with Kulia and Rashad and connected through action items that they're also helping to lead related to the Page Amendment. My email is in the chat. Our website is in the chat. Our Page Pledge is in the chat. And we just look forward to continuing to engage with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Till next time.
Thank you.
Thank you all.